Going live. Just a second. And we're live. Uh, Hello, everyone. Добрый день, друзья. У нас сегодня с вами в гостях потрясающий инженер Джордж Масsenburg, человек, известный по работе с огромным количеством потрясающих артистов, человек, на котором ответственность за создание параметрического эквалайзера в начале 70-х годов, человек, причастный к таким брендам, как GML и Samtec. Ну, в общем, потрясающий инженер. Дальше мы перейдем на английский, и по-русски вы сможете почитать это в субтитрах. А пока я начну задавать Джорджу вопросы. Hello, George.
Thank you for your very kind introduction, Ilya.
Thank you for joining us during these times. It's a pleasure for all of us to have you here. And I don't want to waste our time and waste your time. And I will start reading people's questions.
Great.
So first of all, from Sergey, who is actually a nice acoustician here. First of all, let us all thank you for your contribution to the music industry. Your experience is fascinating and very inspirational. If we have to imagine the size of how thankful we are, then it will probably be a cake made of pure gold with the size of Pennsylvania. We are honored to be able to speak to you and ask you some questions.
That's very kind, Ilya. Thank you.
And first question from him is, how did you come up with the idea of creating the parametric equalizer? I mean, the idea seems very logical, but was it like that story about Isaac Newton with an apple, or the idea was floating at the time and you find the perfect solution?
Okay. Just about everything I do for engineering is to fix a problem or a shortcoming in a tool or a workflow or something that's to make music. The first equalizers I had to work with were an Altic-Lansing graphic, 7-band graphic, and a Lang PEQ2, which is like a Pultec.
Mm-hmm.
And I was unable to get into the things in a sound, in a source that I wanted to get to. In particular, the big bump in an acoustic guitar. An acoustic guitar is a big Helmholtz resonator. It's big and loud at a very sharp peak. So I wanted to control that, and none of these other equalizers would hit that 100, 105, 110 hertz point to control that peak in an acoustic guitar, or a snare drum where I heard one ring and I wanted to zero in on that one ring. And past that, it was just looking for a circuit that would do that. And then it took some time to implement a circuit that would control the cue or the peak shape. But after I did that, the hardest job by far was to sell it. Nobody seemed to know what it was for. So I had to demonstrate it. I had to tell them how to use it. And then very slowly it took variable characteristics. But back then, it was just, it was very difficult to sell. That was the key, is how to sell it.
So it took, how long did it take you to start selling it? I mean, how long did it take for people to get it, to get how it works?
Well, Sergey, these are good questions. I initially had the circuit design in 1960, dropout. And I had a lot more fun in the studio than I had in classes. And I felt that I wasn't wasting my time. I felt like I was wasting my time in a university. I don't think that's true anymore. I think universities are good, and I teach in a university at McGill University. And I'm reminded that I have to be relevant to my students every day. That wasn't the case at Johns Hopkins University, where I went to school. It was horrible. So I went to work in a recording studio, and that was in 1968. And we didn't release, well, we built a console with parametric equalizers in 1969 and 1970, and we couldn't sell it. I mean, I made records on it. And then we did build something that we showed at an AES show in 1971. So it took a couple of years. It did not come fast. So a couple of years.
Great. Thank you.
Good question, Sergey.
Thank you. How would you describe a mixing engineer's mission?
Wow. Well, first, I have to tell you, there aren't that many people who can just be mixing engineers, just be mixing engineers for a lifetime. In fact, I can only think of one, and that's Al Schmidt. He's a mixing engineer. Nobody else can be Al Schmidt. Nobody else can be me. But as a mixing engineer, my job was to explore how to find a sound that reached someone's heart. That music, listening to music, is about your head and your guts and your heart. And you have to listen to music as a mixing engineer in these three ways, I think. You have to be able to deconstruct a piece of music, to deconstruct, to take it apart, and to be able to describe how to put it back together. And that's one of our classes at McGill Masters is we call it sound alike, where you listen to a record, maybe it's your favorite record, and you think, that's great, I can do this. Well, wait till you have to do it, because you have to take apart every instrument and replay every instrument, re-sing a vocal, then mix it as the original. And you learn a lot about what it takes to put something together in a cohesive fashion so that it's, I want to use the word provocative, it's stimulating, it feels new and fresh, and at the same time has something that reaches your deep right brain, the amygdala, the listening centers of the brain, something that triggers something that you're used to, be it a folk song or an instrument or a theme, something to reach for that people can grasp while they learn to love your song. That's the job of many. That's the job of the producer, the writer, the recording engineer, but the mixing engineer has the more important job, not the mastering engineer. You know, when people make shitty mixes, they're always looking for mastering. Don't master it. Mix it again and do it right. Forget this fucking mastering. Now, you guys are mastering engineers, so I don't mean that you are not important, but the mix is more important. So let me make one more comment. Sure. Along those lines. My oldest friend in life who died 2 years ago, Doug Sachs, who ran the mastering lab in Los Angeles, which was the original independent mastering room. He started it. Doug Sachs started mastering independently, independent of record companies. I would make a mix and I'd go sit down with Doug Sachs, and Doug would fucking take it apart. Said, "Where's the bass? Are you kidding with that drum sound? Go back to work on it. I'll see you next week." That was really important to have not only a mastering engineer, but a critical listener evaluate your work. So let me just spend one more second on that and then ask me questions. The most important part of our job is not mixing. It's not pushing buttons on a plugin. The most important part of our job is critical listening and critical evaluation, really understanding without prejudice and without an agenda what we're hearing. That's critical listening, being able to say, and it's not quite right. What I need to do is listen to it and have it tell me what it needs. Critical listening is about experience. It's about experience in being critical and not being tied to a solution. Now, being tied to a solution is, okay, I've got a Chris Lord-Alge plugin. Hey, man, if I had a Chris Lord-Alge plugin, I just hit a button, it would sound like Chris Lord-Alge. No.
Imagine that.
Oh, it would sound like shit. And that's all I have to say.
It's a great answer. Thank you. We have a question, which is, could you please share some thoughts on critical listening, whether it's listening while recording or listening to other music or even listening to artist reference? From Sergey as well.
That's Sergey, you're very good. I hope we get to meet.
It's another Sergey, but he's...
Okay. Here's to all the Sergeys out there. Here's the thing is when you're doing a record, when you're introduced to an artist, it's very important for the artist to have you understand what they hear and what they love. So when you listen to their reference recording, so an artist has a new song and maybe they have a demo and the demo is very modest. It's very shallow. But they tell you, I want it to sound like Joni Mitchell, or I want it to sound like the Eagles, God help you. I want it to sound like somebody else, that you listen to what they're talking about in that record that they really love. Because it could be the song. Songs are really it could be every part of the performance, from the instrumental to the vocal to the phrasing of the lyric, the story behind the phrasing of the lyric. All of these things. It's usually not addressable by technology. Support. Here's something that helps. But let's not confuse things. You don't take a hammer to a screw. You take a screwdriver to a screw. The right tool for critical listening, the right tools for critical listening are learning how to listen. The right tools come out of that. If the song needs reconstruction, then you need to work on the song. If it's the tempo of the song that needs to be fixed, that's could be done by a computer, but it's best done by performing it again. Or the key, the best key to support an artist. Yeah, we have a harmonizer, but the best way to do that is to perform it again and get it right. Did I answer your question? I think I got off on another track.
Not off. It's actually really, really inspiring and informational. And thank you. So I will just ask maybe too many questions. So please stop me if I'm...
No, you're great. But I would love to see some of our listeners, but I guess they're all on YouTube, so I can't see them.
For now, it's impossible. We've done such thing like maybe 2 weeks back with Michael Brower.
I know Michael Brower.
And Michael asked to, like, if we can set up the the Zoom webinar. So we set it up in a week or so, and it was really, really nice when we all could see each other.
Well, next time, Ilya, and we will do this another time, but next time let's do a Zoominar.
No problem. I'd be happy and proud to host it.
My pleasure.
We have a question from Roman Urozov, who is a brilliant mixer from Russia. I've been fortunate to work at the Complex Studios in LA in rooms that you have created.
Wow.
One room still had Massenburg console. Could you tell any stories behind building the place?
Wow. There are so many stories. I can't think of one. One story. Wow. Was a record called, I'm sorry?
We can go to another question if you wish.
No. I'll tell you some stories. My favorite record that I did at the Complex was Toto 7, the group Toto. And I had done several records. I helped them with Miles Davis on 6, and I knew them forever because we're all friends in Los Angeles. Toto 7, I owned the studio. I bought the multi-tracks and was renting the multi-tracks. I was producing the record. I was engineering the record, and I was babysitting this incredibly difficult group. And I swore I'd never do it again. But I'm very proud of that record because it's the best of everything about the complex. The big room, Jeff Beccaro playing drums in this huge soundstage. It's a song called Mushanga. I think I hated the lyrics. I couldn't get them to change it, but the track is amazing, and it's Jeff Beccaro. And I actually made a transparent record. Songs like 1,000 Years with all of these incredibly complex reverbs. And the question was from Roman. Do I have the name right?
Yes, right.
So I would love to hear your work and to hear what is perceived as the modern perception of what's perceived as mixing in Russia now, because I'm much more interested in the cultural differences between communities than I am about making another hip hop record. I don't need to ever make another R&B or hip hop record, but the idea of the great music of our countries and the great cultural heritage we have musically, that interests me deeply. New York has brought I hope I haven't frozen. I think Bjork has brought the history of her home country to modern music. I love that. She doesn't sell that many records, but boy, I love what she does. I'm getting off subject, but the thing about the complex is every part of the complex was designed to be transparent to the music, to make it easier for the performers to hear. And it's the first that I used control room, and that caught on, but that was the first room that used 2D surfaces, quadratic residue diffusers, that control room. And they were so good that I kept dreaming of what would make it better. And that's, if you've ever heard of the studio that I did in Nashville 14 years ago called Blackbird Studio C with all the diffusion. So that was a dream that started in 1980 that I did at the complex. It started the career of Peter D'Antonio at RPG, and that ability to control acoustics with diffusion. The consoles were great, but nobody understood them. You know, we made all these hit records on APIs, and APIs had a sound. I didn't love an API sound. I appreciated that it wasn't transparent. It was lumpy in the low end. I think I'm frozen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back. The API consoles were highly colored, but we made all these hits. And when I built the GML consoles for the complex, people hated them because they weren't colored. They were just transparent. They were big and bright and boomy, and they were just transparent. I thought it was fine, but they hated it. It took a while to sell that.
So
complex.
Thank you for answering. We have another question from the first Sergey, who asks, let's talk a little about the famous Blackbird Studio C in Nashville. How did you come up with such a design for the room? Was that a courageous experiment or a precise engineering calculation? It looks like not the most effective way of using the space of the room, but it definitely is a great sounding room, and it definitely is a piece of architectural and designer art. If you have to create a project for a studio nowadays, would it be something similar to this studio, or would it apply some other methods and constructions?
So Blackbird Studio C was an experiment. It was very expensive because a building was built from scratch for both Studio C and D and another control room called F. So Studio C, I've been building diffusion surfaces, as I said. I built them at the complex in 1980 and 81, 82. I built these 4x8 roll-around diffusion surfaces for Skywalker Sound for George Lucas. I had an artist that was engaged to George Lucas, engaged to be married, Linda Ronstadt. And so I was introduced to George Lucas and worked at Skywalker Sound for six years. And I built these surfaces, and I would put them out in the middle of the sound stage at Skywalker and put them around instruments. And this big room that really didn't have diffusion now had a wealth of big sound. Like I would record Jeff Beccaro in the middle of this huge room, put these surfaces around him, and it would blast diffuse sound out into the room. I thought that was pretty cool. So I shelved that dream until I met John McBride. But well, I always wanted to build that room, which was a perfectly diffuse room. That was a dream of mine for years and years and years. But I knew it would be expensive. Finally, I talked John McBride into spending a lot of money on it. And John McBride is a passionate audio guy and a record guy, and he's a studio owner with a vision. And he saw the possibility in this room, and we built it. We spent a lot of money. Engineering-wise, it's a very precise calculation. It's called a primitive based on a large prime number. And I'm thinking it's 138,767, but I could be off by a couple. But a large prime number that would give you subprimes in such a way that you could divide the four main surfaces of the room by subprimes. But there are 138,768 different lengths. So it's a primitive root sequence that I expressed on an Excel spreadsheet of all things, and then broke down the slices. So each of the walls has hundreds of medium density fiberboard diffusion elements. Each one is numbered, bottom and top, all around the room. And they're in precise positions. So nobody could argue with the math. It is an honest to God primitive root diffuser on all four surfaces. The experiment was, how low does a diffuser go? Not how low does it measure, not what's its spectral response of one surface in an anechoic chamber, but in a room, how low can you say the diffusion actually is effective? One. And two, can diffusion act as absorption? So we answered both questions. Diffusion can very much act as absorption due to the chaotic nature of air going around all of these edges on all these sticks or tines. Air is chaotic, and it spends its energy by friction around all of these tines. But it couldn't go that low, even though these elements were 30 some inches long, over a meter long. It wouldn't really be effective below 100 or 200 hertz. And in fact, the flaw in the room, just so you know, there is a flaw, and the flaw in the room is we couldn't diffuse low frequencies, the low octave. And we tried. So if you look at the ceiling at Blackbird is a massive 12 by 13 primitive root sequence with 8, 10-foot variations. Yeah. Didn't work to diffuse low end. So, going back to mixing, our best mixes are in rooms that we get used to. In the 60s, we got used to terrible control rooms with Altec 604s and utility units. We made some okay records. The Hidley rooms were dead and kind of lifeless, but we learned how to use them. The Eagles made a great record there. So it's the rooms that we get used to, that we do our best work in. Well, Nashville engineers are a pitiful, unimaginative lot, and country music has suffered from not being innovative until the last 9, 10 years. Got more innovative. It got more innovative when I left Nashville for Montreal. They didn't have me to beat up anymore.
And what do you think is the most innovative thing in pro audio for last decade?
That's hard to say because I don't think there's any one thing. I'm very proud of this recording I did for Tune Track of drum samples, Superior Drummer 3.
There are lots of questions about that one. Really lots.
And I did. We had 34 microphones on every single sample, or more. But we had surround. We had a couple of Swedish mics. We had dynamic and condenser overheads on the drums. And I thought it was pretty innovative, but only a handful of people have ever used the surround capability. And it's fantastic. You can make huge sounds. I don't want to say Dolby Atmos because I think that Wilfred van Beurlen in Belgium has come up with RO3D, and it was the first opportunity I had to really hear music mixed in immersive, and Wilfred did it, not Dolby. And Dolby's always been, just trying to make money. If they can make money, they'll march out of technology. Otherwise, forget it. But I think immersive is going to be
Big.
Something for you guys to work in. So I want to hear back from Roland, is it, and see if you're mixing in immersive. If you have 4 speakers in the air, if you're mixing in 7.1.
Yeah, I hope Roman is still here and he will answer. He sends you love for answering his question.
Cool.
And Roman is writing on chat on YouTube that tracking came out itself, and it even seemed like unfair to track in these rooms at Complex Studios. I've been to the Studio C at Blackbird, quite a trippy feeling, says Roman, to be there, but sounds insane.
Okay, so Roman, I don't know whether you were in Studio C since they put in the Atmos monitoring system, but this is the new Studio C at Blackbird. And I mixed 2 records for Alicia Keys in this room in immersive, and they're very impressive, if I do say so myself. But I don't know if anybody else will ever hear them because they're listening on that little Echo Studio. I don't think so. And the number of people who will hear giant immersive sound, it's pretty small because it's inconvenient to set up a 714 system in one's home. But I think that this is coming because listening to sound in this studio goes right to my heart. And I'm blown away by some of the mixes other engineers, in particular David Leonard, who mixed a Billie Eilish immersive record, and it's existence defining. It makes my heart sing how great some of these mixes are. So that.
Thank you. Next question from me, actually. What are your thoughts on classic versus modern microphones? Do you like using classics or prefer cleaner modern mics? And have you ever had any ideas microphone design?
Get you to repeat if you could, because you dropped out. One more time. Classic microphones, did you say?
What are your thoughts on classic versus modern microphones? Do you like using classic or prefer cleaner modern mics? And have you ever had any ideas on microphone design?
Yes. I like Sanken as a company, and I helped design the amplifier that went into the CU44. And I think it's a design that continued. It wasn't really my design. It's a design that Sheps has used for some time, where they use a transistor pair, a PNP transistor pair, driving the mic lines directly and eliminating the transformer. To me, that was a fabulous idea. And I helped Sanken implement it in CU44s and subsequent microphones. I like the Sanken CO100 a lot. It's a wideband mic. It's very smooth through 20, 30, and 40 kilohertz. Has amazing imaging per 192K. And I know that many of you don't want to take high.
Excuse me, you freezed.
Particularly when you listen to Morten Lindberg's 2L records. Morten Lindberg from Oslo is making some of the most amazing recordings I have ever heard in my life. And he's using high sample rates. So that's one thing, is I like the idea that we can get closer to analog by using high sample rates and better resolution. Microphones, I can't afford to take my old mics out. It would cost too much to fix them. So I have one microphone that I still use, which is a C24. I use it in MS. It's got Stephen Paul capsules, 0.7 micron capsules. And it's a little bright, but wow, the imaging in MS is fantastic.
24 in MS is like one of my favorite mics, especially for piano miking. I love it.
Especially for piano, you're absolutely right. So other mics, I have a U67 from the 50s, early serial number, and it's been my main go-to vocal mic until recently. Now I'm using new mics. For rock and roll, I'm going to use an SM7B. You know, who cares that it's cheap? For rock and roll, it's for pop music, it's all you need. For certain hi-fi or jazz vocals, I'll go back to a Sanken, a CU51, or a more modern mic. I'll use Audio Technicas. The Audio Technica 4060, the only tube mic I think Audio Technica ever made, is one of my favorite acoustic guitar mics.
Same here.
I have a C12 that I love on acoustic guitar, but if I break it, it's going to cost me a fortune. And that's a shame.
Yeah. Oops. Are you back?
I'm back, but I love new mics. I think people are making new mics. There's a new microphone from Vienna called Austrian Audio. That's a great little mic. What is it? 808, I think. It's a great mic. It's variable pattern, so you can put it in front of a guitar and change the pattern and help focus on the sound that you want.
Yeah, it's the team who were behind the designs at AKG. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a great team.
Yeah. So let's move on. I have another question, and thank you for really informative and deep answers. It's really very inspiring and informational for us all.
I appreciate the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. From Dmitry Kolobov. Do you use equalization and compression when recording? Also, would like to ask about your go-to or favorite mic setup on drums, and how do you like to blend close mics, overheads, and room mics? Thanks.
That's a good question, but the answer is multiple answers, because I have at least 4 different ways to record drums and then variations. If I had to give you one setup, I'd be in trouble. There are many different setups for drums. Equalization, I have a different way of recording than I used to have. I used to get a sound live, get everything live to storage. So when you put up a 16 or 24 track and made the faders even, equal, you'd hear the record. I still do that, but I do it in a different way because I'm going to use what I record as test signals for developing the stuff that I develop. I want it flat to tape, or flat to storage rather. So I will record through a very good mic pre and not EQ to storage, but I EQ and compress a lot into the artist's monitor. That way, and I make mistakes. I work fast, I work from the heart, I make mistakes. But if I make mistakes, I can reverse my bad choices if I haven't committed them to storage. So as far as EQ, I'll EQ things. I'll particularly EQ an acoustic piano. I invariably use my EQ. I very seldom use anybody else's EQ. I will EQ a voice in the phone so that the performer, I'll EQ and compress a voice in the phones so a performer can fit into a track. Not too loud, not too soft. I don't compress a lot unless I have a performer that goes from very soft to very loud, where I'll not only have a compressor, but I'll have my hand on a control while I'm listening to the performer's feed so I can get that mix exactly right during the performance. But to storage, it's pretty much flat to storage. So I have to watch levels, have to be careful of levels. I think that answers your question.
Yes.
But I use a lot of EQ.
Thanks. Next, there are lots of questions here.
Uh-oh.
What are your thoughts on loudness wars and modern tendencies on delivering music to the listeners?
Oh, fuck me. Oh, God.
Service is way too loud.
Okay. I started working the loudness wars in the mid 2000s. A group of us, Thomas Lund was at TC, now at Genelec, Florian Kammerer at Austrian Radio, Bob Katz, and I would go out and do presentations on why loudness was bad and what we needed to do. Regularly attending the DTV audio group in Las Vegas, which is Jim Starzinski and Roger Charlesworth, and just participating in audio loudness standards. So we had a lot to say, and there is an implementation for loudness called BS 1770. Still learning. What's important is that we've gotten through to the streaming services. First Apple, and now a lot of people, most recently Spotify, is going to loudness normalize. For me, it's essential for us to learn how to mix where we don't slam the level into the mix bus or into storage, because it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't help anything. It's just distorting your product. And the mistake that artists make is when they get, Roman, when your artist gets a mix back from you, calls you up and says, it's not loud enough, it has to drive you crazy. Because what you really have to do is educate the artist that it doesn't matter if you make it louder. Downstream, at delivery, these modern algorithms, loudness normalization algorithms, are going to pull it back to, if it's television, minus 24, minus 23. If it's Apple, minus 16.5. If it's YouTube, I think it's recently minus 14.
14, right.
Spotify, I think, is minus 14. So the challenge is educating artists, because all the artist is asking you to do is to fuck up your mix. That's all she's interested in, or he's interested in, is how much can you fuck up my mix so that I feel like I'm not a little person. Because if I put on my record and somebody else's record and they're 1 dB louder, next time that engineer gets the gig. So I'm battling with engineers here. In particular, Manny Moroccan, who just, or Serban, these guys that make unthinkable money, slamming the mix bus and slamming the storage. And it's just awful. So it's a modern dilemma, but it starts with educating the artist.
Great.
I've been doing this for 15 years. I don't get, but we did all of the initial work in letting people know what loudness normalization is. I did a session at the AES last fall, did a very concise session. And somebody stood up and said, I don't understand. If I don't make it loud, the artist won't like it. At the end of this 2-hour session, they still didn't get it. So it's a very difficult subject to explain, but you have to explain it.
Thank you. It definitely is. Another question. It is very interesting. What terms, concepts, and thoughts do you have? You hear me?
Yep, hear you. I'm back.
It's very interesting. What terms, concepts, and thoughts do you have in your mind when you describe the quality of an equalizer? Do you think that analog vibe of equalization is reachable in the digital domain, concerning technical part and artistic impression? What digital equalizers do you like? Yeah, the answer may be obvious, but still, it's very interesting to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Let me be very concise. I like my digital equalizer. It does everything I want it to do. If I had a choice of one equalizer to use on everything, it would be my equalizer because I designed it to be transparent, and that's what it is.
Totally.
There.
Sorry, it's freezed.
That's a great design team. I love the Sonics guys, and they're very honest and forthcoming about their techniques and about their work. I think Paul Frindle, who did some of the original work at Oxford, is brilliant and innovative. I think there's some other good designers out there. I just happen to not like color equalizers. I don't think that's not where I want to add color. If I want to add color to an equalizer, I'll get a plugin that just adds color. And I'll do an equalizer and a dynamics unit and then another equalizer. And my vocal chain is very often 6 plugins, which are not only a high pass filter, a dynamic parametric, and I like the whole grain, Dwayne Wise's whole grain plugin. I think it's DYNEQ, DYNEQ, is a 4-band dynamic parametric. It's very good, and I use that a lot. He's a very good filter designer. I'll use equalizers before and after my dynamics plugin. I have a dynamics plugin.
Yeah, we all know it.
But we're going to release it soon. We promise it'll be released soon. And lately, my friend at Eventide, Tony Agnello, has sent me an Eventide plugin.
Sorry.
Station. So if you need to make a guitar sound, no more Sansamp. Crush Station.
Crush Station. And we have an sorry for interrupting. We have a funny question in YouTube chat from Andrew. Have you checked Acoustica Audio Green EQ, which is actually GML EQ model?
Okay, who is this? No, what's the product called? I'll look it up right now. I may know it.
It's Acoustica Audio. It's an Italian company who use some Impulse technology to create plugins, and they kind of do like sample analog gear to create their models. The plugins are heavy, high CPU, and kind of.
Okay, so I have very many friends in Italy, and I think this this could be a good product. I think that's great. Great if they can make some money at it. I'm not big emulation. I don't use a lot of the universal audio plugs. I really only use reverb, which I think is suitable for convolution. I don't like the universal audio dynamics plugs. I have no use for the universal audio EQ plugs. So emulation, it's easy. What strikes me as being suspicious is putting up a picture of a classic limiter, like a 7, putting up. Now listen to this sound. That's a Fairchild 677, and it's not. It's nowhere near, because dynamics are not adaptable to convolution. They're too chaotic. And although I have many friends that are making a lot of money from universal audio, it ain't me. I don't use them. I don't like them. I like Reverb. I like their emulation of Al Schmidt's 250, EMT 250. I think some of their plates are pretty good, but I have no use for any of that other shit.
Great, thank you.
Sorry. I'm going to get into a lot of trouble. I'm going to get into trouble for saying that, so be careful.
No trouble. I mean, the truth is always the key to, like, I don't know, to feel better, to do better things. So I don't think we'll get into trouble.
Okay.
There is a question from my fellow engineer, whose name is Ilya Mazaev. He says, George, I know you've created one of the most accurate automation systems for Focusrite and AMIC consoles. Now that we are all in the box, those features developments are much unavailable. Though DAW plus controller setups have some imperfections in both latency and accuracy. What's your opinion on possible improvements to what we have?
Okay. I'm really glad you mentioned that. Let me talk about the GML automation system. A couple things were very important in that system. One, which is an interface paradigm, an interface and a workflow. And finally, Pro Tools pretty much emulated that in the early days, in the early 2000s, but they missed something. And I got them to add it in the late 2000s. And what that is, and it's a tremendously powerful mode that I think they executed well, called playback trim. And if you go into Pro Tools and you select, say you're in playback mode, and you select trim, fader turns orange, and you can offset a fader while moves are running underneath it. That's important. Offsetting the fader is part of the original strength of the GML system, that you could create a group master that just offset a local fader so you didn't lose your moves. You could just override them, either destructively or you could coalesce. But all of the ideas in the original GML system are in modern automation systems, except for Focusrite. He did some things that I think are still crippling. As a mixer, I don't want to be locked into automation, and Focusrite makes you do certain things in your workflow that I can't stand. My view of automation has changed dramatically over the years. I used to automate everything. I did live mixes. Some of them were great. Some of them I couldn't duplicate, by doing a one-at-a-time mix. But in general, now I find that the less automation you do, the better. The less automation, the better. And as a mixing workflow, say I have a guitar that takes a solo, or a guitar that changes between a verse and a chorus and a solo. Instead of automating that change with a fader, instead of automating that, I'll break it out into 2 or 3 different tracks and set each of those sections to approximately the right level. Now, I still move the fader, but I rough in dramatic changes. We're talking about guitar players that aren't sensitive to performance and not sensitive to dynamics and where they fit in the mix, which is to say most guitar players out there. Sorry, guitar players. but I'll assign different tracks to different parts of a song before I go automating it. And this means that I'm free to change these levels. I'm free to change the level or the EQ or the effect sends in the solo and not affect other parts of the song. And that's a big difference. It's automating by workflow instead of by technology.
Great. Thank you. Um, Next question from Dmitry. Uh, Newbie engineers are always making many mistakes in the start of their sound engineering career.
They sure are.
Which mistakes, in your opinion, are easy to avoid but do make a lot of harm to your career development?
Well, one thing is doing too much that you can't be sure of early on, is to make impulsive changes in EQ or impulsive changes in compression. EQ you can reverse to some extent. If I print bad EQ, not high and low pass, but just bad EQ, I can reverse it. Bad dynamics are yours forever. So I think that one thing is to get away from this idea of plug-in dynamics curing all of your problems. They don't. And to get back to the idea of mixing, I think learning how to mix is something that's hard to sell to newbies. That you have to move faders. First, because they don't have any faders in front of them and they can't afford work subs. I've got an S3 and it's to address the other question about automation. Finally, they've got the speed of the fader up to where the GML automation was, which is about 20 milliseconds, 25 milliseconds. These faders that we've been living with, and I won't use any names, but they were really bad faders. And by the way, all of those fader designs come back to the original GML design of fader. Almost all of them, not all of them, almost all of them. But we were able to do a very fast motor because we could dump a lot of current into that motor that moved the fader. And now, and accurate,
Excuse me.
long time, these, sorry?
Excuse me, we are freezed. There was a freeze.
Okay, let me go back and say this again, that we finally have faders that are fast enough and accurate enough to be like the GML faders. GML faders are very expensive to build. Had a big slot car motor and a fish line. Everybody laughed at it, but now everybody copies it. But one thing that the inaccurate fader does is not allow you to update. You guys have seen on an artist mix, you found where you have automation and where you touch the fader, if you look at the automation, there is a discontinuity because of where the fader physical position is. It's different than the fader logical position. When you touch it, it goes, whoops, I'm not at that level, and it's a big jag. Those were almost impossible to use. So now these modern faders have speed and accuracy enough to just work. I mean, the important thing for me is not to mix with my eyes. The important thing to me is mix with my ears, which means I can't go poking around on a work surface with a mouse and pretend that I can hear from my heart at the same time. I have to have a fader under my hands and close my eyes and fit that sound into a mix. And fit that sound, find its right position without looking at waveforms, without looking at meters, just to fit that sound into a mix. So I think the modern little consoles are pretty good at that, getting better.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question is from Sergey again.
Again, Sergey.
Yeah, we got a few lists.
Wow.
This question has no intentions to humiliate anybody, but instead to inspire others to experiment and develop their skills. So, could you share any failure or mistake that taught you a lot in your career? And also, what can you say about your mentors? Can you share any of their advice to you that you find universally useful? Thank you very much.
Well, going in reverse, my mentors were Phil Ramone and actually many others. But I grew up outside of New York and Philadelphia. I grew up in a little market in Baltimore, and I had to invent pretty much everything on. So my mentors came later, but Phil Ramone um, or Kyle Lenning, the thing that I learned from my mentors is as an engineer and producer, never let them see you sweat. Take a deep breath when confronted with an impossible situation and just think about possible alternatives. Never let them see you sweat. And the other thing is, as a producer, always have a plan in mind. The producer's main job is to keep the agenda, not to arrange the song, not to mix a song, is to focus agenda so that the artist gets what he or she expects at the end of a certain amount of time. That was taught to me by Peter Asher, who is another one of my great mentors, great producer, very intelligent man. And I never had a boring moment in the studio with Peter Asher. There was always something interesting to talk about. Going for, remind me what that is, Ilya.
Yeah, just a
What
sec.
was
Yeah, the question was about your mentors and your mistakes. Have you had any?
I had huge mistakes. One mistake that I learned to avoid is trying to do too much. So I was producing a TV show. I've been doing more and more video in the past 15 years, producing a TV show with my wife's group called the Rankins, a famous group in Canada, not so well known anywhere else. In Canada and Scotland and England and Ireland. I was producing a Christmas show and mixing it and engineering it and running Pro Tools all at the same time. And we had a run through, we had a full run through of our production and with 2 or 3 songs. And I accidentally reached over to Pro Tools and did a command period, which completely deleted that part of the show. It was an incredibly embarrassing mistake, one that I had to admit to right away, one that was very hard to recover from. And I learned a lot recovering from that. So I've made a lot of mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. And I urge newbies, I urge new practitioners to make their mistakes early and often. Don't worry about making mistakes. Make mistakes and learn how to recover from them. Whatever that is. If you race a track, figure it out. Do I have that performance? Do I have that vocal somewhere else? What can I do to reverse that mistake? You guys, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Learn how to recover from them.
Brilliant, just brilliant. Thank you. I've had kind of the same experience one in my life when I've just erased the results of the whole day in the studio with some experienced producer, and I was like, was ready to shoot myself.
We have all done that.
Yeah, that's what he said actually. Thank you. We're still on time, right? Do we have?
I have about 15 minutes left.
Okay, so let's try to give it like 10 minutes. Then we'll
Sure.
go offline from the YouTube, and we'll finish our discussion here, like in.
Great. Great. Thanks, Ilya.
Um, what do you like the most in recording music, and what do you think is the most important part of the process? Has it changed throughout your career, or the core idea remains the same? Thank you.
For me, the most important part is understanding how much I can do, but how little I can do. If I'm listening to a new song I'll want to understand exactly what not to do first. If I'm listening to, well, I did a mariachi record with Linda Ronstadt. She came to me with a plan to do what turned out to be a very popular record. And I knew that I knew very little about the culture of Mexico and the history of mariachi. So the first thing I did was to get as much experience as I could in listening to old, sometimes mono recordings from 1940s, 1950s of classic mariachi. Not only the song and the performance and the context. Much of mariachi came from parlor music, playing these classic songs in a parlor, in the acoustic of a parlor. And I really enjoy bringing that experience to making a record in terms of what not to do, and then let the record take its course, and maybe you learn something new. But I wouldn't enjoy a record if I just went in and turned on a mic and somebody out there played a song. I used to do that, but it just doesn't, anybody can do that. I want to understand what the very best presentation of recorded music is. And when I can do that, I'm really happy. So a couple records I've done, old records, were Lyle Lovett, Joshua Judge's Ruth. It's an old record, but it's still fresh. Sounds great. And there's a surround available of Joshua Judge's Ruth that's still good. It's set a quality level that still stands. Or the Toto 7, or Aaron Neville, Warm Your Heart, any of the Linda records, Cry Like a Rainstorm, the Nelson Riddle records that we did. I'm very proud of them, and they were tremendously gratifying.
And do you remember what was the last time when you felt nervous about an upcoming release of yours mixed by yourself? I mean,
well, first, I'm always nervous. I hate everything I've ever done. I would remix every single record I ever made and make it better. The question that I always get today, but I bet somebody wants to ask is, how do you know when a mix is done?
it's the popular,
right?
Right.
Very popular question. So here's the answer. It's never done. It's only abandoned.
Yeah,
I would remix everything I've done and ad infinitum until there was absolutely no criticism. And finally, that record would be the most boring thing you ever heard because it didn't have any character or rough edges.
And how long does it usually take for you to mix a song? Like, if we're speaking just regular, like,
could take 5 minutes, could take 2 months. The Toto record took 10 months, but it should have taken 2 months. So it took 40 weeks in the studio of trying things and changing their minds. And let's go back to this, and let's use the first take on that. But it all could have been done in 8 weeks. It could have been done. A mix, an average Toto mix, an average Hollywood mix, a Don Henley mix, a Bruce Hornsby mix, is a 2, 3, 4 day mix. A vocal overdub with Linda generally takes 2, 3, 4 days. Now, she doesn't sing anymore, but when she did, it was exactly what she wanted to hear, or at least as close as possible what she wanted to hear. And how we did that was to keep trying it as a whole song. So we would never fix one word by just going in and singing one word. We all know that doesn't work. But generally, when we did a vocal or a mix, we try a whole mix and then break it down, start from scratch, do it again. So the classic Earth, Wind, and Fires were like that, where we didn't have automation. We would come in and do a mix, and if it didn't work, and
sorry,
the important about that is you would, on subsequent mixes, you would, did you hear all that?
since we've heard it until if it didn't work,
take it down and do it again. Earth, Wind, and Fire, if we came back and remixed, we would take the whole mix to zero and build it from scratch, which you had to do on analog desks. You didn't have automation. So that's where automation locked you into something that maybe wasn't the best answer, the best solution. That if you just started from scratch, even if it's a big mix, start from scratch, and the more important things get turned up. The less important things get turned down. So generally, people be bored up, and I could mix it by myself, and I didn't have a guitar player behind me saying, "Turn the guitar up." That never works.
thank you. So I'm sure, and not just I'm sure, but I see that everyone feels really happy about what we had here. So thank you for being with us.
Good.
I will now turn off the streaming.
Well, I want to say goodbye, everybody, and thanks for listening. And anybody has other questions, please send them to Ilya, who will send them to me, and I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you. I'm turning off the stream.
Okay, bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Just a second.